All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Mike the New Haven podcast. This is episode 122. If you haven't checked out episodes 120 and 121, I suggest you do. Episode 121, Yal Baltour, who is the former coordinator of the NYPD social media accounts, increasing their outreach amongst the social media community with Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and so on and so forth. It's a unique look at a very underrated aspect of the NYPD. In episode 120, an emotional edition of The Best, the Bravest, interviews with the FDNY's lead, Tim Brown, Volume 7. Great guy to talk to about a great career in the FDNY. So from the NYPD, we continue with that theme from 121. We love to do NYPD and FDNY interviews on this show, and my next guest had certainly an interesting time in his 23 years in the force, caught many killers as a homicide detective and negotiated many precarious situations as a member of the elite hostage negotiation team, not unit. Notice it's the only division in the NYPD it's referred to as a team, and there's a good reason for that, as we'll be discussing. He is also a doctor in philosophy and is currently teaching as a professor and author as well. He has 3 books, one of which is the children's book, The Police Are Part of Our Community, and that is retired NYPD detective, professor, and Dr. Al Titus, who joins us now. Al, welcome. How are you?
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Mike. I'm well.
It's good to have you here. So the first question is always an easy one. Where did you grow up and where are you right now?
Okay, well, I grew up in a tough neighborhood in Queens, South Jamaica, Queens. A lot of famous drug dealers came out of South Jamaica, Queens, and there was always conflicts between the police and the drug dealers. So it was an interesting neighborhood to grow up in, as well as to stay out of that type of environment. My parents were always on top of me and ran scenarios. My mother ran scenarios with me as I was growing up. What would you do if this happened? And you had to have the right answer, otherwise obviously she would teach us. So I had a great upbringing in South Jamaica, stayed out of trouble. Went to high school to become a airline pilot. Actually, that was my goal. I went to aviation high school, and my plans was to go to the Air Force after that. But that changed. I ended up going to college and getting a bachelor's degree in electrical computer technology. So I tried that for a little while, but my heart was always in law enforcement. So I ended up in law enforcement anyway.
So that brings us to, 93 when you get on the job after the academy. There's a funny story that you told when you were on Off the Cuff with our friends Bill Cannon and Mark DeMeo, that you were walking down the street in uniform and you were thinking, yes, somebody's going to see you, a brother in uniform. It was the opposite. You got a negative reaction. Tell me about that.
Absolutely. That was the day that really woke me up. I thought, coming from the streets, coming from South Jamaica, Queens, I thought I knew what I had to know about the streets, and I thought that would make me the best cop possible. Plus, a minority African-American officer. I was supposed to be working in Harlem and Washington Heights, which is a minority community. I put on my uniform. Of course, it's all nice and everything's shiny and the leather's not cracked, and so you could tell I'm a new officer. So I put on this uniform and I'm ready to walk out onto the street. And the response that I got from the community was not at all what I expected. They were calling me a sellout and Uncle Tom, and it was an interesting reminder of the climate at that particular time, and how the police were somewhat disconnected from the community. And that was the start of everything that followed for me, that drew me closer into the community.
So you worked 6 months on patrol before you went over to Plainclothes. So in that 6 months time, as I always like to ask my cops and firemen when I get them on the show, who helped you learn the job? And are there specific moments from patrol, either funny or dangerous, that stick out to you?
Well, patrol was interesting. I worked in transit in District 3, and we worked in a unit called Tactical Patrol Force. So we patrolled the subways from 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. So when everybody's at home and sleeping, we're out there on the subway. So we had, a lot of great times, a lot of fun. A lot of our patrol was solo patrol, so we had a lot of interaction with the homeless and the worst of society, because it's those hours. they always, and it was a citywide unit. So one of the first times that I had a dangerous situation was they always told us, because it was citywide, we would ride one train line, like let's take the A for instance, can run through several boroughs. So they would always tell us, when you get to the train station at the end of the line, do not get out of the station. Do not leave the station, because it's citywide and we don't know what's going on in that particular community. And you're walking up there not as a cop from the local precinct who knows the community and knows where the heated areas are and not. You're just coming out as a cop from maybe another borough. So I went out and I'm looking around. Of course, I didn't listen. So I went out and I'm looking around, and all of a sudden I hear this large, like, explosion. And I, I feel, and I hear these pellets hit the ground right by my foot. And I realized that I was just shot at by a shotgun with pellets. And it was a wake up call. It was another wake up call. So I put over the radio, 1085. I took cover. I took out my gun. I was standing right outside of a group of projects, housing development, and I couldn't even tell you the name of it, which shows you that I should not have even have got out to the train station, because I didn't know that community. And obviously there was a very hot community. The local precinct was having a lot of problems in this particular development, and they had already put word out that they were going to kill a cop. And I had came out not realizing what was going on. And so, ESU came and they did a search of the building, and they found a show. They found a slug from the shotgun on the roof, but they didn't find anyone else out there. So it was a learning lesson.
Dr. and retired NYPD Detective Al Titus is our guest here on episode 122 of the Mike the New Haven podcast. And so, you being in the transit district, I have to ask just to make sure I have this correct. So were you New York City Transit Police originally pre-merger, or were you
Yes.
always NYPDs? Okay, so
Yeah.
Working in transit, as the old motto is, as you've heard Bill Cannon say, you ride, we hide.
Yes.
When the merger came around in 95, I always like to ask the guys who were in housing or were in transit pre-merger, were you happy about the merger, or were you sad about it?
A little bit of both, to be honest with you, Mike. Transit was a very close-knit family, and the bosses treated us like they were our parents almost, and they treated us like family. It was a tight-knit group, and we knew that NYPD meant that it was opening up to a more politically driven, a more non-personal type of policing, of a police department itself, at least how they would be treating us. But we also saw it as a great opportunity to expand, because there are opportunities in NYPD that we did not have in transit. So we were looking forward to it, but we were also very apprehensive as well.
So when you get absorbed into a different command, some guys made the move laterally. Like if you were in housing or transit ESU, or as transit referred to it, rescue, that's where you went in the NYPD. Or if you were in this detective squad in transit and housing, for example, robbery, that's where you went. So some guys had it all right. But for you working in plainclothes for a while, sometimes there's the cold shoulder when you get to a new command. It's like, this guy's transit, and it's the NYPD. They're the biggest and the broadest agency of the three. They have the most resources. So were you fearful of that? And was that the case when you made the move to your command upon the merger?
Yeah. I wasn't fearful of that because, well, first of all, being in transit and getting into plainclothes so quickly, I was a very active officer. So I always had a lot of arrests. So that meant that I was definitely going to be taking my arrest, instead of to the transit district, you're now going to be taking it to the local precinct. So yes, I knew that there was going to be some kind of something. I didn't know if it was going to be positive or negative, but when I actually went through it, it wasn't bad. A lot of the precincts welcomed us, and then there were a few of those that were like, all right, transit, just step aside, kind of pushing us to the side, and we kind of had to make ourselves known. We kind of had to kind of put our foot down and say, listen, we're here, and we're doing our thing down there, and you guys just have to make way for us. And they did, and eventually everything went through smoothly. But I really enjoyed Plainclothes. I have some great Plainclothes stories. One of the best things about being in Plainclothes, especially in transit, you're riding the subway, you're wearing regular clothes, not only regular clothes, you're wearing clothes that fits the image that you feel public has of you. So I would be wearing my how would I call it? Street clothes, like the back then it was the baggy jeans, the Timberland boots, the either the baseball cap or the hoodie or the Kango hats they had back in those days. I don't know if you know what that
Yeah.
is, but
Yep.
yeah. So and me and my partner, this time in Plainclothes, you have a partner. So me and my partner things would happen right in front of us, and we would just flip out our badge, and everybody, including the other passengers, would be like, "Oh," like they would be so shocked, and it was just such a good feeling to know that you were actually part of, even though you were being perceived one way, you were actually doing positive work.
Right. And the thing about plainclothes is that, to differentiate from my listeners who may not be familiar with police operations, plainclothes is not the same as undercover. I know they can seemingly be confused. Undercover, you have an entirely different identity. There's a specific operation going on. And you see that often in cases where you're trying to bring down, for example, a terrorist cell or drug dealers. Plainclothes, you are working patrol, not in a conventional uniform, but you have your same identity. You don't have to change your name or anything like that. And so I wanted to ask, because I had this conversation with both Peter Pranzo and Derek Parker, who worked plainclothes for a while before he went out to the first hip hop unit in '99. Sometimes in a plainclothes unit, responding officers may not know who you are. And in some instances, we've seen it's led to tragedy. We both remember the Omar Edwards incident in 2009 as an example. They didn't know he was a cop and he ended up getting killed. So for procedures to ensure they know he's ours, he's a brother in blue, take me through what you guys did to make sure that a tragedy like that was averted.
Yeah. Well, we always let our supervisors know where we were when we were assigned either a specific train line or a specific area. We never veered out of that area. And at this point, even though I learned a very important lesson when in uniform in the past, I knew now being in plainclothes to definitely not leave the subway. If you are chasing an individual and they run up into the street, you have to stop, because the NYPD officers, they weren't in that time, they weren't even on the same radio channel as we were. So there were a lot of issues there. And there was a thing called a color of the day that every law enforcement officer knows. They're giving that out every single day. And it's worn by the officer, either a like an armband or something like that of that color, so that you know that it's law enforcement. And the number one rule that you have to remember is, when the uniform officers arrive, if they don't know who you are, they control a situation. If they tell you to drop and put your hands up and get on the floor, even though you're an officer, you do it. Everything else can be figured out later. The last thing you want is a mistake to be made because you felt that you had to let him know at that particular moment that you were law enforcement. It's not always necessary at that particular moment. So you have to listen, and you have to know that uniform is in control.
Right. So the gold shield, getting that, it's a process that is unique to New York City in that you can't take a test for it. Like you can take a test to become a sergeant or lieutenant or captain. It's given to you on merit, and after a few years of doing plainclothes work, being an active cop, as you said, you get it. But just because you get it doesn't mean you're an investigator. You still have to earn your stripe, so to speak. So when you first got that gold shield, tell me about, and we'll talk about your time in Homicide. Is Homicide where you wanted to be always?
Yeah, yeah. When I first got on the job, to be honest with you, I thought of going the other route, because when you join law enforcement, or at least with NYPD, you can go the detective route or you can go the supervisor route, where you go sergeant, lieutenant, captain. my initial plan, being as grandiose as I am, was to become chief of police, of course. And that's the plan for a lot of young minorities coming from minority communities. They have these ideas that they can change the world, and you do make changes. But once I decided that I wanted to be a detective, yes, homicide is considered the best of the best, and that's where I wanted to go. And that was my goal from as soon as I started doing plainclothes work, I knew that that's what I wanted to do.
Where did you work specifically? Did you work in Brooklyn? Did you work in the Bronx? And which homicide squad were you originally assigned to?
Well, I've worked in Manhattan my entire career,
Okay.
which is a blessing, because Manhattan is very different from every other borough, which I'm sure you've probably heard from other officers and detectives. But yeah, so I got my detective shield in the Manhattan robbery squad. So I worked robberies for several years, and then I had a great case that caught the attention of the homicide squad. And I was actually asked to come into the homicide squad, which isn't common. Usually you put in for it and they make a decision on whether you can get it or not. They saw the type of work I was doing. I worked with some great officers in the Manhattan South Homicide Squad on that particular case, and they liked the way I wrote my reports and the way I testified in court when that time came. And they asked me to join. And of course, there was no way I was turning that down. I had to have a serious conversation with my family at the time, because I knew that when a homicide happens, you're there for several days, and sometimes that's just the way it is, and there's a lot of travel involved and things like that. So I had to make sure that I had family support before I was even going to make that move.
Titus is our guest here in the Mike Mann podcast. Happy to have him. This is episode 122. I am Mike Colón. So getting to a homicide squad, I asked this, I don't mean to sound like a name dropper, but I want to dive into this because I was having this conversation with Phil Grimaldi as well. And that there is the anatomy of the investigation, to where, okay, there is the body. And sometimes there's separate investigations, homicides involved in, for example, if somebody tragically dies by suicide, there's an investigation into that, but that's a little bit different. In a case where somebody is killed by someone else, either accidentally or maliciously and intentionally, take me through, okay, this is terrible, but you can't think about it on that level. What goes through a good homicide detective's mind in terms of getting all the theories out there, assessing the scene immediately, and going about making sure that they find the person responsible?
Right, right. It is a very intricate way that homicide cases are handled. The very first thing that becomes important to a homicide investigator is the crime scene. That crime scene has to be secured. You, as the investigator, have to walk that crime scene when the time is right. You have to be able to direct crime scene. A lot of people don't realize this, but the detective often directs crime scene to collect or to test what they feel may be important, in addition to what crime scene already knows to collect. Um, and then from there, it comes to trying to find out if there are witnesses, anyone who's seen anything. And then thankfully, today, technology is what it is. When I first started in homicide, technology was just starting to come about, and there were some video cameras and surveillance and things like that. Nowadays, when we have a lead, when a homicide investigator has a lead on a suspect, there are so many avenues, so many tools that we can use to locate and track this individual. We have video surveillance, we have GPS on vehicles, we have Easy Pass, we have OnStar systems in cars. People don't realize cell phone track and trace. There are all kinds of pieces of evidence that people don't realize that lead us or allow us to find out where they were at a particular day or time, or where they are right now. It is very difficult today to go completely dark, as they say, to go completely dark and just disappear. So thankfully, there are those tools, and law enforcement has access to that. And when trained properly, you know how to use those tools, and that makes the investigation that much easier. But again, our focus is finding closure for the family, finding closure for this victim, making sure that this person's death, the person who killed this person, answers to the crime.
Every homicide investigation is treated the same, but I imagine by detectives, but every case itself is different to where, if you get, for example, we had a situation where thankfully she's going to be all right, but a mother was walking her 2-year-old, and I'm sure you heard about this, and she was struck by a stray bullet. She's fine, thank God.
Yes.
But what if she had gotten killed? Well, then everybody's going to want to talk about that. Or the 1-year-old baby who was shot by a stray bullet last summer. Who wouldn't want to get justice for a 1-year-old? But in the instance where it's gang-related stuff, and there's a mob hit, or there's just a gang hit, drug dealers fighting over territory, one kills the other. There's this culture, which we both hate, I'm sure. I know I do. I'm not snitching. I ain't saying nothing. I'm gonna go out there. I'm gonna get revenge, man. I'm gonna handle it myself. Yes, so in instances like that, which is such an idiotic machismo way to look at it, of course, but it happens, and it's prevalent, where they will not talk to you because no matter what, even if it's their best friend that just got murdered, you as a cop are unfortunately in their eyes always going to be the enemy. How does an investigation like that work?
Very often, investigations like that take longer than your traditional homicide investigation. That's because usually these type of homicides happen in an environment where not only isn't the people that are close to the case not speaking, but the whole community is not snitching. So you're knocking on doors, doing your canvas for witnesses. You have windows that are right over the crime scene, and no one saw anything. No one knows anything. It takes a lot longer. It helps, and we have had situations where we built in the Manhattan South Homicide Squad, we built connections with key community members, whether it be a community member in a particular housing development that is the head of the board or whatever the case may be. And a lot of times we can go to that person and ask them to help us, and they can go and get us some information that would at least direct us in the right way. And when we don't have that, we're kind of left with just hoping or just waiting for something to happen and someone else to get into trouble and be willing to make a deal to give us information on one case in order to help their case. Very often, that's how we solve those type of cases.
I want to ask you on a more humorous level. I'm a child of Law and Order, and I mean like all the Law and Orders, not just, SVU or, I watched Criminal Intent, I watched the original, and the original was great for me because Jerry Orbach, the late, great Jerry Orbach, is my favorite actor ever, and he played Detective Lenny Briscoe. So somebody like him, for an example, is that an accurate I'm not talking about the investigation because TV embellishes a lot. Right. It doesn't take an hour. But as far as the personality, was his portrayal of Lenny Briscoe an accurate portrayal of a homicide detective in your eyes?
Homicide detectives come in all shape and forms, but there is usually, every homicide squad I've been to, there's always at least one Jerry Orbach. there are different characters, and it's very interesting because I've always wondered why no one has made a movie or a television show similar to like a Barney Miller type of a show about a homicide squad or any squad for that matter. But there are some characters in every squad, and it's just great. It just adds to the environment and just makes it that much more fun. I can honestly say that my entire time in the homicide squad involved with serious or heart-wrenching cases was fun. Just because of the guys that I'm working with and the young ladies who helped me come up and some of the guys that actually trained me and taught me in the homicide squad, it was a great time.
One show I'll give you, if you haven't watched it, it was portrayal of the Baltimore Police Department homicide squad. I'm not talking about The Wire. Homicide: Life on the Street. That's a really, I don't know if you watched that show. I've seen that. Excellent. Yeah, it's an excellent portrayal of a homicide squad.
You're right. Very good. You're right. Yes. Very good.
In terms, I don't know if you worked these particular incidents in this one I'm about to mention, but you worked in Manhattan. And when cops get hurt, specifically when cops get killed, for example, in 1997, May 19th, 1997, Tony Sanchez from the 13th precinct responding to a robbery is shot and killed. In instances like that, where your brother or sister in law enforcement is hurt and seriously injured, or in Tony's case, sadly didn't survive. Um, I don't know if you ever worked a cop shooting, but if you did, take me through what goes into something like that, because you got to work quickly, because not only does the family want answers, the brass wants answers too.
Yeah, yeah. A cop shooting is a very serious situation. You get to the scene, and there are more cops than you've ever seen in at any crime scene. Everybody wants to help. You have bosses making making decisions and giving commands, and being in the homicide squad, you're part of those decisions. So normally, you have patrol standing by, you have the detective squad standing by, but you have the supervisors having meetings, and you as a homicide squad are part of the meeting and the planning and the devising of the plan on how you're going to go about finding this person's killer. And you're given all of the information, and you're given the opportunity to give your input, to throw your ideas in. And the goal there is to get this person off the street as soon as possible, because we know one of two things is going to happen. Either this person is going to realize the seriousness of their crimes and do harm to themselves, or this person is going to flee the city, the state, maybe even the country. So we know time is of the essence. So we work as quickly as we can, and it's no, there is no stone left unturned. We get other agencies involved, the FBI, everyone gets involved, and it's all hands on.
One last note on Officer Sanchez. He was, as I said, he was slain in the line of duty on May 19th, 1997. He was posthumously awarded the NYPD's Medal of Honor on Medal Day 1998. So, working, I mentioned this earlier when you first came on the job about guys and gals who helped you learn it. With that seasoned investigator who has seen many a case and knows the ins and outs and even knows some of the bendable rules, who would you credit as those detectives that helped refine you, not only as a homicide investigator, but just as a cop, period?
Yeah, yeah. I would give credit to my very first, well, one of my first partners in homicide, Detective Randy Roca. He was he was he was like a friend. He was like an older brother, I would say. He guided me through. He let me do things and watched, and then we critiqued it. It was a very, he allowed me to explore things my way before giving me other options, not what's right and wrong, but just other options. There was another individual who actually kind of noticed my work before I even got into homicide, and her name is Irma Rivera Duffy. I think you may have had her on the show before.
She's a good friend of mine. Yep.
Yes, yes, she is an amazing detective. I've never met any person, not just male, woman, cop, or civilian. I've never met a person like her in my life.
No, neither have I.
She is like a big sister also, and she guided me, and she told me, what, even, with the small little conflicts in the office and things like that, when that would happen, don't let them do this to you. Don't let them do that to you. She was really good with helping me stay focused on the job. And there was another individual who I actually shared a desk with at the time, and his name is Jimmy Piccione. And he was a great detective that spoke to me. It was like a father-son relationship, and he was a Caucasian male. And but we had that bond. We had some kind of a bond where he would talk to me, and I don't think he had that with a lot of other people, but he would talk to me like a father, and he would give me advice and guide me, and it was just a great learning experience all around.
She has no filter either. She just does not care, because I was in the city, and I love Irma. Shout out to you, Irma, if you watch this episode, which I know you will, because she was
Yes,
really
yeah.
excited when I said that you were coming on.
Mhm.
I was in the city a few weeks ago to see her, along with the pal of mine retired from the bomb squad. And she was in her PI office. She comes out. She said, "Come on, I'll show you all the junkies in Midtown." I'm like, okay.
Yeah, that's
And
her.
that is her to a T. And so,
Yes.
talking about the guys and gals you worked with, I want to expand on that, because, and I want to dive into your educational background in a moment too. But first, before we get to that, a good boss to any squad is pivotal, because, much like a fish thinks from the head down, and there's that rock. If
Hmm.
there's a great boss, it's the complete opposite effect. Everything
Right.
runs even smoother, because you don't want to be in a situation where you're getting great work done in spite of a superior and not because. So for you, having that boss who, in a squad like that, or any squad, its job is to, yes, let you work, but also his or her job is to know when to pull you back. Who is that person for you?
I would have to name two people for this one. The first one would be my first squad commander in the homicide squad, which was Lieutenant Stephen Camadis. This was a gentleman's gentleman. I don't know if you've ever heard that name before, but he had control without having to flex, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Just the respect that he gained and the way he knew the business. When you would come back from an interview or an autopsy, um, somehow he knew the outcome before you even came into his office to explain what happened. He was just so in tune with everything that was going on. Either that, or he was just able to read us, or he just, from his experience, he knew how things were going to play out in advance. I don't know which one it was, but it just made you feel so comfortable knowing that you have someone who actually knows the job. And the second person would be a sergeant that I had. Her name is Sharon Brooks, and she's someone that I'm still close with now. And she was the type of boss that she was part of the investigation with you. She always got involved with the investigation, hands on, feet to the ground. She was out there doing canvases, interviews. Me and her did many interviews. Me and her, we did many things together as if she was my partner at certain times. But she was still able to maintain herself as a supervisor. So she still had that, which it just worked so well. So thanks to her, she was able to pull us back when we needed to be pulled back. We went out every once in a while to celebrate a good case. She was that boss.
So I want to get to your time in hostage negotiation. Like I said before, we'll do that. Given where you are now, and we'll discuss your career post NYPD as we go along here. I can tell that education has always been very central to you. Obviously, you're a college educator. You did that before you came on the job. But the PhD, of course, teaching about the future of policing to a younger generation that wants to be a part of it. And from your experiences, teaching them about that as well. In those rare down moments when you weren't investigating the case, would you use that time to crack open a book?
Absolutely. I got my whole master's degree on the job, and I did all of the coursework for my doctorate on the job. Whenever there was downtime, whenever there weren't cases that I had to type up or phone calls I had to make, I was doing schoolwork. Yes, absolutely. I never let it get in the way of my work, but whenever I found time, I did. And another funny thing is, back then, I remember towards the end of my career, there was a popular show out. What was the show with the zombies that everybody liked when it first came out?
The Walking Dead.
Walking Dead.
Yeah.
Walking Dead. So every day, or whenever the show came on, all the guys would be in the lunchroom talking about the Walking Dead, and I'd walk in. They'd be like, "Oh, did you see it?" I was like, "Listen, I don't watch TV. I go from work and I go home and I'm on the computer doing schoolwork. So I didn't need, so I wasn't part of those conversations because I didn't watch TV. I was always working.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So getting to the time in hostage negotiation, this is interesting because I learned this from our friend Scott Wagner, who was a member of Homicide as well as Hostage,
Yes.
in
Thanks,
that
Scott.
it's really, it's voluntary. It's not, I don't know if it's like this now, but at the time it wasn't extra pay, it wasn't overtime or anything like that. You were there because you wanted to be there. So before we
Yes.
dive into the intricacies of negotiations, what made you want to be there?
Well, once again, it was something that intrigued me. They were known at, just like the Homicide Squad, as being the best, the few select, almost like the Marines, kind of, not with the intensity of the work that they do, but just being that selective. And you know, I found it very interesting, and I inquired, and I went through the process, and they accepted me, and the training was incredible. And as you said, there's no extra pay, there's no extra overtime or anything like that, but it comes with huge responsibility. It comes with, wow, I mean, you could be in the middle of a homicide case and you get a phone call that there's a hostage job, and you have to now kind of switch hats, take off your homicide hat and put on your hostage negotiation hat, put on your hostage negotiation jacket, and go out and handle that case, usually alone. Usually alone.
Jack Cambria led the hostage negotiation team for many, many years. He
Yes.
officially took it over. Gentleman Jack, he officially took it over in 2001. Before that, it was Hugh McGowan and Frank Bowles who founded it in the 1970s. And with that, I mentioned that because every scene is different sometimes. And this is something that sometimes emergency service will deal with primarily. But if we have somebody who is suicidal, who's up on a bridge and is threatening to jump, or anybody that's in a position where they want to harm themselves. If there's somebody that's doing a robbery and now they're holding somebody hostage, we saw that last year. And out in Queens, as an example, they were holding two elderly women who thankfully were released sans any injuries. We'll dive into different situations. So first, for the person that is threatening self-harm, we feel for that person. They need help. We don't want them to make a decision they can't come back from. What are you telling that person in that scenario?
Well, I've had several H&T jobs where a person was trying to commit suicide, and the first thing I do is try to first open up the line of communication. Sometimes they don't want to talk, but if once you open the line of communication, then you can find out what's going on in their lives, and you can try to relate to the situation. Thankfully, I've always been able to relate to the individual, or at least make it appear that way. And the goal is to let them understand that suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. Whatever the issue is, it will pass. There will be a time where you may even look back at it years from now and laugh, because you know there's always a brighter day coming, and that's important to get across to them. And a lot of times, if you can relate a story in your own life, your own experience, to them and show them how it still turned out positive, that is often the key thing that allows them to see that what they're doing is not the right way to go.
Absolutely, because in that moment, it is impossible, it seems, to see the forest from the trees because you're only shrouded in that negativity that's swallowing you. And so I do sympathize with that person. But like I've said before on this show and in my day-to-day life, there's somebody that wants you around. And you may not feel that
Yes.
way in the moment, but there's somebody that, and including that person that's talking to you right now, trying to talk you out of it, they want you
Exactly.
around. They want to make it, they want you to make it to the next day. And so we'll go from that to the criminal element. That person that, like we see in the movies, you'll never take me alive, coppers. He or she's not going to go down without a fight. Successfully, many a time, we have seen hostage negotiators talk these people down into not just giving themselves up, but coming out, feeling remorseful, even crying. These hardened criminals too.
Yeah.
So how do we get there?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned what you mentioned before about loved ones, because what I usually do and what I've seen other investigators do is you try to find a soft spot in this individual's life. If they have a child, if they have a brother or sister that looks up to them, or a mother, or whatever the case may be, and you and you kind of relate to them that this person, you're going to ruin this person's life. You're going to harm this person by your actions. And if you can refrain from doing what you're doing, you'll have an opportunity to still have a relationship with this person, to still continue on and not cause unrepairable damage to this person's life. Because if you do not come out, this only ends one way. We need it to end with you being alive and you releasing the hostages, and everything else will just fall into place after that. But the alternative is not a good alternative. And for your own family and the family involved with the hostages, we don't want that outcome. So just think about the different options available to you.
There's so much that goes into that team. It's such a refined operation that has been molded through the years, as I mentioned, through the men that have led it. And it's not like you could just say, all right, I know what to do. Yeah, don't do this. And yeah, come out, it'll be great. You really got to know this craft because it's a matter of life and death in so many instances. Yes. So as far as the training to be a good hostage negotiator, tell me and the audience by extension about what you have to do to make sure you can get into that unit and what the kind of schooling that you have to go through and courses that you have to go through once you're in the unit to stay in the unit.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, you have to be chosen, which means you put in for it, or you put in an application to get hundreds of applications. You have to be chosen. And that being chosen means you've gone through a one-on-one personal interview, whether it's on the phone or in person, with the leader. At that time, it was Jack Cambria, as you mentioned. And he wants to find out what kind of person you are. Are you a person who has the patience? Because hostage negotiations can go for hours, sometimes days. Do you have the patience to be able to speak to someone for that length of time, to be able to stay true to the conversation and true to the goal of the conversation without getting frustrated? Are you able to see past sometimes the criminal element in an individual and see them as a human being and work the problem that way? So you have to be an individual who is not, as we call it in law enforcement, does not have that tunnel vision. You have to be able to see many different aspects from a single situation and be able to maybe explore a few of them as you move forward. The training is intense. It's to me, it's the best training in NYPD. And before the end of the training, you actually have to go in front of the door. So there is a door in the hostage negotiations where they actually run scenarios, and every investigator that goes through the course has to go through that practical part where you are run through a scenario with a great actor named James Shanahan. He's another detective that is just, I'm sure you know him.
I've heard of him. I need to get him on the show.
Yes, you do. You do. He's a great guy. He is like the actor, like NYPD acting. That's him, 100%. So he plays these characters, and they also have other actual people that actually do plays and things like that. Other actors and actresses come in and work this situation and work the scenarios to run through it with you to make sure that you're comfortable when it's time for you to go out there. In addition to that, the academic part of the course is actually trained through John Jay College, and you get certified in being able to handle emotionally disturbed persons, which is a certification in itself. And it's college credited and everything. So that shows you the type of work that is involved, and it's very condensed. So to be able to get that kind of academic training and practical training in a matter of weeks shows how intense it is. And again, very selective. There are a lot of detectives that I know that were interested in going into the to the hostage negotiation team, and they just didn't make the cut. So it's very selective.
Any parent that's had to negotiate with a baby or a toddler, they should have first dibs though if they're going to apply. You know,
Maybe so. You're right. You're right. You're right.
maybe so. So this is interesting in that I know that so many cops, sometimes they know what they want to do post career. When they get to around 15 years and they're inching up on that 20, they're beginning to think about, okay, what can I do next? Certain guys, you know, they have a harder time figuring out what's next because they love the job so much they don't want to stop. So for you, as you crept up on that 20, and as we get closer to putting the bow on your career and then going into your teaching career and your author work as well, when did you start thinking about, okay, given your love of teaching, this is what I want to do. Let me start forging the path now so that when I do put in my papers, I can just go dive into it head first.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's another interesting story because I was having a conversation at a hostage negotiation job, actually with Jack Cambria, and we were just talking, and I mentioned to him that one day I would like to teach, to try teaching. That would probably be the next move for me, is what I was telling him. And he said, "Oh, that's funny. I teach at John Jay." He said, "Why don't you come to my class and I'll let you teach a class?" I was shocked, but I knew it was an opportunity that I could not let go by. So I took him up on his offer. I met him at John Jay. I didn't really teach the class, but I spoke to the class, and they had so many questions, and it was so fulfilling. It was the same fulfillment that I get from law enforcement. And I knew from that day, this is what I want to do. And from that day forward, I started preparing myself for a career a career transition into John Jay. And actually, a year before retiring, the supervisor I had in homicide. So in addition to, listen to this, in addition to getting my PhD, being in homicide, being a hostage negotiator, I taught at John Jay at the same time. I did all those things. John Jay was willing to give me one course in the evenings, one day a week, and I was able to leave homicide on that particular day, make an arrangement with my boss, and go teach that one course. And that allowed me to really get my feet wet and start to learn the whole teaching field. And from there, it was history. I decided this is it, and I went forward.
Just to, like I said, put a bow on your career, I did want to ask you this earlier. These investigations, rather in homicide or in hostage negotiation, are intense. They're tough. They put a significant strain on your mind because these are human beings at the end of the day. It doesn't matter if they were a drug dealer or a great person that wasn't involved in any criminality. It's just wrong place, wrong time. And somebody who was loved and is now gone in such a cold and brutal fashion. And not every negotiation in a hostage goes well. Sometimes these things do end in tragedy through no fault of your own. It's just the person was not of the right mind and they went through with their course of action that culminated in their demise. What helped you not take it personally and bring it home?
Well, I had young children at the time, so I knew bringing it home was not going to happen. I decided early in my career, I never brought anything home. I never shared my experiences at work, which I believe, I can't say that that's right or wrong. The officer or the detective has to make that decision based on his situation. You have to know your partner and who you're with and whether they can handle these things or not. And I decided to not even let it go there. And I decided to just handle it myself. I would go to the gym a lot. I would work out a lot of my anger and frustrations in the gym, lifting weights, punching the bag, whatever it took. And that was my outlet. And that allowed me to be able to release all of that negative energy and come back and start afresh. And oftentimes in that process, I'm able to actually think through and come up with some new ideas and solutions on how to dive into the case further after that. So it was very helpful. And that's something that I also tell my students, always have an outlet, always have something or someone that you can turn to get everything off of your chest.
Given that, and that's very important now, with just an emphasis in general on mental health, not
on
even in the
mental health.
emergency, not even in the emergency service field with cops and firemen, but just in general, talk about it. Don't let it
Right.
fester. And there's not many good things about the time we're living in right now with COVID, but one silver lining has been we've incentivized. Open up. Don't hold that in, because that's the worst thing that you can do. So, even with your teaching career in full swing, and I do want to ask you about your books too. And Alfred Titus is our guest here in the Mike Maven podcast. I'm Mike Colón. That first day when you woke up, you put your papers in, you're done, you're not a cop anymore. Yeah, you were excited about the next journey, which you're doing very well in, but still, I imagine, it felt awkward. After so many years of doing it, how much do you miss the job, even with what's going on now?
That's a really great question. I miss the job a lot, and I miss what I miss about the job are the cases, the individuals that I work with, my partners, people like Irma and my partner Jose Flores, and other people that I've worked with throughout the years. But what even more, and this happened to me almost like a week or two after leaving NYPD, and I'm driving through the city going to John Jay. So I'm crossing maybe 57th or 34th Street, and I hear lights and sirens, and I see cars flying by, RMPs in the opposite direction, and I make a move to hit my lights and go with them, and then I kind of forgot. Oh, I'm not on the job anymore, and it being part of all of that excitement and thrill that I miss. That I miss. Yeah, that's the part I miss more than anything. And just solving these cases. It was a great career. That again, I would do it again. I would do everything again, exactly the same.
You are an author as well. And just a quick aside on that, it's funny, two guys told me this. When I asked them similar questions, one said, because you can, in the NYPD and really any law enforcement agency, but especially in a city like New York, you can go where others can't. But there's a
Yes.
great line by Anthony Lisi, who was a guest here as part of my miniseries focusing on the emergency service unit, the E-Men. And he was a sergeant in ESU, and he says, I just miss being in the know. Same thing, because he's in his words, I would know when I was in ESU if a gnat farted in Afghanistan. But with the second I put
That's
in my
right.
papers, I don't have a clue of what's going on. I find out,
Right.
via the television, the news, and the newspaper. So your
Absolutely.
books, I have three of them here. I appreciate you sending them my way. Actually, as a matter
Okay.
of fact, we're going to take a quick pause in the Mike Naven podcast so I can get those books, and we will be right back. All right, we're back in the Mike Maven podcast. Like I said, I wanted to get his books. I could actually show you the audience that'll watch this on YouTube, and that is Forward Motion, the keys to progress and success. My virtual background's kind of affecting the vision, but hopefully you can see that a little bit. There we go. There is also the personal side of policing. Let me get it at the right angle so you can see it. This is the drawback to having a virtual background. And of course, the last one is the newest one of the bunch. And the police are part of our community, and that is a children's book. So the process for an author is, very, very difficult, because naturally you want to make sure you get it right. It's a long, painstaking research. But I think the key is to just get started, I imagine. And at least it's there. You have a body of work. So putting together that first book, take me through that process and what you learned about what you should do and what you shouldn't do.
Yeah. Well, that first book was actually written in my mind from just going through the trials and tribulations of being in law enforcement in a city like New York City, and dealing with so many young people who just simply lacked guidance, that seemed to have just been thrown out onto the street to fend for themselves. I was always that detective who asked, after an investigation or interrogation with an individual, a young person, what are you doing here? Why aren't you in school? What are you doing with these people? Why aren't you, how'd you get involved with the gangs? You can get your life together. I was always that detective. So that first book is written for that young person. It's called Forward Motion, the Keys to Progress and Success. It has a few stories from my youth, But the goal of the book is to show young people that how to avoid the pitfalls and obstacles of life, the things that can stop you, the things that can destroy your chances of just being successful in life, and to focus on the positive and pushing yourself to be successful, pushing yourself to go to school, to do all of the right things. That was my first book, and that book, it was a great accomplishment for me because it was something another one of the many things on my bucket list that I've always wanted to do. But I learned from that book, the writing came easy, the publishing came easy. The difficult part was marketing that book, getting it out there, getting people to understand what I was trying to do, who I was trying to reach. That came with a lot of work after the fact, and I'm still working on that today. I started an entire nonprofit organization where I go out and speak to young people just based on the information in that book and the whole premise behind that book, to help our young people to be that guidance, to be that mentor for the young people. There's so much of that missing, and some of it is not even the fault of the parents. They just don't know themselves sometimes, and you know that can be part of the problem. So that's part of the reason why I retired as well, is because I realized that, coming from law enforcement, if you're looking to help individuals like that, there's only so far you can go, because there will always be that level of, or lack of trust to some degree. So coming from a civilian standpoint, not only can I reach more people, I'm able to really get involved with the individual. Where in law enforcement, I couldn't go back to these people's homes or call them on the phone. I couldn't, you can't do that to try to help their child while you're in a homicide squad. You have other things to do. So this allowed me to really get down into the trenches with the community and help them in that way.
And some of it is also babies having babies. When you're 16 and
Yes.
17 years old, what are you doing with
Yes.
the kid? Me,
Right.
like I've said, mentioned before, I'm in my early 20s now, and there are stuff I'm just beginning to figure out. And so how
Yes.
could me, who was barely able to take care of myself and still learning and trying to get my own life sorted out, and all of a
Perfect.
sudden, out comes the baby, and now I got to be responsible for that. So that's part of it too. It's just, there's a
Absolutely.
generation that is not being observed closely enough. And there's obviously very severe consequences to that. Well, I've had a lot of fun speaking with you, and I'm glad you came on. It's been a really
Thank
good
you. Yes.
conversation. The hour has flown, but
Definitely
I
has.
always
Wow.
end with a concluding segment called Rapid Fire. It's 5 hit and run questions from me, 5 answers from you. Are you ready?
I am ready.
All right. So first, yes, there's a lot of bad calls that stick with you, but there's also a lot of great days and great calls in the police department. Most uplifting job you ever responded to?
That would have to be the H&T job, where I had an individual who had climbed over the guardrail on the Williamsburg Bridge, and he was threatening to jump. And I was able to convince him to come back in and to save his life so he could see another day. That was very rewarding.
Absolutely. Second, and if it's not PG-13, you can say pass. Funniest call you ever responded to?
Funniest call was a car chase. I wasn't driving, and I always start with that. I wasn't driving. We were doing surveillance, me and a partner from another precinct. We were doing surveillance on an individual. He jumps into a Ford Expedition. That's the big one. That's like maybe a foot, a foot and a half off the ground. And he sees us and he starts taking off. Now, we're not allowed to do car chases, but we're following him at a somewhat high rate of speed in an old Impala. He jumps a curb divider, and the person I'm driving with tries to jump the divider too, and we get stuck. And we're sitting there stuck on the divider and watching him because our car couldn't clear the divider like his Ford Expedition was. So it was frustrating at the time, but looking back at it, very funny times, very funny times.
Third, if I remember correctly from your interview originally on Off the Cuff, when you were going back and forth with Mark, who's a Mets fan, You are a fan of the Yankees, and we both
Yes.
share that in common. And
Yes.
I don't even know what the Yankees are doing these days, but yeah, the jury's still out on that. So give me your favorite Yankees of all time.
Oh boy. You know, I know this is going way back, but I like Reggie Jackson.
That's fine,
That
Mr. October.
Yeah, Mr. October. I mean, I think that would be one of the one, Jeter, of course, the common ones, but yeah, definitely those two.
Fourth, favorite bar or restaurant in New York City.
Favorite bar and restaurant. Well, there are many, because another one of the benefits of being an homicide, you get to go out to eat a lot because there's a lot of meetings and discussions done over food. So, but one of my favorite is not even that type of restaurant. There's a bar and grill called Molly's on Third Avenue between 21st and 22nd Street. It's an old Irish pub with sawdust on the ground. They make the best burgers that I've ever tasted. So that would be the best place just off the top of my head, Molly's for their burgers. And there's a kind of nouveau type of club called 235th. It's actually a rooftop club on Fifth Avenue. And I would often go there after work just to kind of, release some of my tension and stuff. But you have beautiful views similar to your background of New York City, and it's just a great vibe. So those would be my two.
For those of you who will watch this on YouTube, just a quick aside, I'm trying out a new virtual background. It's a photo that was taken from the Brooklyn Bridge, or from the vantage point looking towards the Brooklyn Bridge in 1998, and featured prominently in the background, of course, is the Twin Towers, of the World Trade Center. So fifth and finally, you teach, like I said earlier, the next generation of cops, and you yourself have said previously, that policing isn't pretty. There's intricacies to it, as we've discussed in this show, that the public doesn't know about, but is needs to be done, but is gritty and grimy. So given that, what have you told young people that want to come on this job? If there's anybody that's listening right now that wants to come on the job, what would you say?
I would tell them that now is a great time to come on a job, even though a lot of people would feel otherwise. And the reason why it's a great time is because policing is changing. Everything goes through changes in life, but right now, policing is going through an amazing amount of change where a lot of the kinks are being worked out, and the opportunities are growing. A lot of this, I tell my students all the time, I've never seen police hiring at this level that I've seen it. Almost every department in the country is hiring right now. So the opportunities are grand. But when you go into policing, and I suggest you do, because I would say, and I don't know, this is not a research fact, but this is my own fact. I would say probably 99% of those that go into law enforcement have always wanted to be in law enforcement from a child. So I say this: follow your dream. Don't let anything deter you. Don't let the current climate, don't let the naysayers deter you. Go forward into policing and be the change that you want to be. So many of my students in John Jay tell me, I don't like the police, but I'm going to become a cop. And at first, I didn't understand that. And then I realized they want to go in to make a change. And it's not the same change that I made, that I wanted to make. I wanted to just affect people's lives. These people want to change policing. And you have that opportunity now. We have a more diverse department than ever before. And there are opportunities for you to get to the level where you can make change. So it's a great time to get into policing, and community is the key now. So all of that transparency and getting to know the community, that's the future of policing. And it's a great time.
That concludes another really, really fun episode of the Mike DeMeeman podcast with retired NYPD homicide detective, doctor, and professor, and author too, Al Titus. His books, like I said earlier, are The Police Are a Part of Our Community, The Personal Side of Policing, and his first one, Forward Motion, The Keys to Progress and Success. Before we go, besides the books, of course, is there anything that you want to shout out or promote?
No, that just about covers it. I do have a website, A Titus Consulting. If you want to see anything of what I'm doing a great sock drive for homeless individuals. buying socks for them because there's so many homeless on the street right now in New York City. It is a problem. And many times, many days back in the subways in Harlem and Washington Heights, those were the only people I had to talk to on a cold winter's night. And I saw their suffering. So I'm trying to just still give back and help them as well. And Mike, I just want to thank you for this great platform and giving me the opportunity to spend this afternoon speaking with you. It was a
Well,
great
thank you.
conversation.
Yeah, I agree. It was a total pleasure. On my end, of course, I'll link my social media and where you want to find me on social media, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn, as well as if you want to contact me on my business emails or my business lines as well. For anybody out there, I welcome it and I look forward to hearing from you. Now, coming up on the Mike the New Haven podcast, we got some really, really interesting shows on tap tomorrow. He has covered the police for 3 decades. He's currently the police bureau chief of the New York Daily News, and that is Rocco Periscindola, who will join me tomorrow, Tuesday, on the Mike the New Haven podcast. Of course, next week, oh man, you're really going to want to hear about these shows. As we know, we do it all. We do law enforcement, fire service, sports, and news. Bob Costas is going to join me Monday, November 15th. That's going to be a great episode with Bob. And November 16th, retired customs agent Lorenzo Toledo, who was in Customs ATF, worked at task force, bringing down corrupt cops, bringing down drug dealers, bringing down gangs as part of the gang unit with the Department of Homeland Security. We got some really, really exciting guests in the works and coming up on the next few shows in the Mike the New Haven podcast as we sprint towards the end of the year. In the meantime, on behalf of Titus, I'm Mike Colón. We will see you next time. Take care, everyone. Stay safe.